Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RetroGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing, as well as analysing, tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully, you're having an amazing day. We have a ton of stuff to get through in today's video. I want to start things out, though, with the PlayStation 5, because the OS reserve of the PS5 is said to be 2 gigabytes. Now, to be clear, this is for main system memory. Obviously, the PlayStation 5 as well as the Xbox Series X have a grand total of 16 gigabytes of memory, but as with the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox One and so on, even the Xbox 360 or the PS3, there is basically a certain amount of that space which is allocated for operating system as well as other functions. So, for example, the OS kernel will reside in here, things such as the GUI for your friends or drivers and whatever else that needs to, of course, be loaded for runtime. And the PS5 is apparently allocating 2 gigabytes, so of course this leaves 14 gigabytes available for games developers. Now, this was first announced by Tidux on Twitter. However, this has also been confirmed with Roberto Serrano, and he is the chief editor at 4news.it, so you would assume that he does have fairly good connections. Honestly, this space makes sense. It's not that well known, but developers with the PS4 as well as the Xbox One for that matter could basically start the console or their games with different reserves. This was particularly true of the PlayStation 4 Pro, because the PS4 Pro has less memory than the Xbox One X. So one of the things that Sony did is I can't remember what the exact term was offhand, but basically there's a mode that the PlayStation 4 Pro has, which essentially just leaves 512 megabytes for the operating system, with the rest of the memory being available for games. And of course this does include the flexible memory that the PS4 Pro uses, and there is as well the DDR3 portion of RAM, of course, which is not what we're referring to here. So we're referring to the GDDR5 memory. The more memory, of course, which is available for games, the better, but with this generation there's a couple of things going on. The first is that data can be swapped in and out of the SSD so quickly for both next-gen consoles because, well, obviously they're using the SSD. So if you're transferring data at ludicrously fast speeds, like 5 gigabytes plus, depending on the console, and obviously various other things that are going on, like the data compression ratio and whatever else, it means that you can fill the main system memory with new, clean data pretty damn quickly. So, for example, by the time your character turns around, like half of the main system memory could have been rewritten with new data. And this is profoundly important when you're trying to create a game. It also means, of course, that developers not just can have access to higher quality textures and other assets, but fundamentally it changes how you can actually create and interconnect game worlds, because data can be loaded in so quickly that it's literally a case of, by the time you step through a portal, there could just be an instantaneous flash of light and you'll already be in a game world. And this means games, for example, I've used this example before, but say Star Trek, imagine there's a title set in the Next Generation universe, you step on a transporter, it beams you to a new planet, and within, 1 second, 2 seconds, the transporter occurs, there's a flash of light, and suddenly you're now in this new area, or this entire new planet. The second thing is, while there is certainly a lot of stuff which goes on in the backgrounds for these new generation consoles, because of the way the SSD works, the data can be basically pulled in and out and paged much faster. So I don't have knowledge of how big the reserve is for the PS5 OS, but firsthand. But honestly, this figure to me anyway, makes an awful lot of sense for the PlayStation 5. And I suspect, but obviously I'm not confirming this, but I suspect that the Xbox would also be pretty damn similar with its reserves too. There's also an interesting leak from China. This originates from My Drivers. If you're unfamiliar with this website, they are pretty synonymous with tech-related news in the PC space. This isn't to say that they have a perfect track record, but they are certainly not a website which just publishes frivolously. They have at least some measure of a decent track record. Anyway, according to this particular leak, and as I said, pinch of salt still, it does originate from My Drivers. However, credit to Droid over on Twitter for the discovery, so thanks very much to him. And you can see the prices yourself. I'm not going to read out all of them because I will be here until the next year. But the global launch is said to be November 20th with a Japanese launch on the 14th. It's kind of interesting that Sony are doing this, if it's true. I would have thought that they would prefer to go with worldwide. I suspect Microsoft would go with a worldwide launch. I don't think they're going to, say, release in the US first or anything like that. I suspect it's going to be simultaneous. Then again, maybe. There is, however, quite a price difference. I'm going to go with US dollar prices, and obviously you can see on screen the differences between your region. But the PS5 is $500, and the digital edition is $400. If you've been following along with my content for some time now, first of all, poor you and commiserations. But secondly, it is actually the prices I've stated a whole bunch of times, not from insider information, but just from logic. So Sony would not, at least in my opinion, go over $500 for a console. They know that that's kind of pushing it in today's climate. And yes, I understand that if you look at it very simply of like, well, a Blu-ray drive is not worth $100. Why? How are they saving all of this? Well, I suspect it's a few things. One, they could possibly simplify the motherboard design a little bit. I don't know. There may still be like a SATA port or whatever on the board itself. For production purposes, they probably would do that, honestly, reuse the same board, but I'm saying that without benefit of knowledge, with first-hand knowledge. But it's also a simpler case design, not by much, but a little bit. And, of course, you are also simplifying the internals of the system just a little bit, of course, no drive. But that's certainly not enough to make up the difference in price, $100, and I would agree. However, if I was Sony and I had this situation, I would encourage people to purchase the digital edition. There's a plethora of reasons. The biggest and simplest is just that Sony get more of a cut for games which are sold digitally because of the PSN store, and it also means that you can't buy used. There is, of course, ways to share games with friends and all of this stuff, and I'm aware of that, but I'm just speaking very broadly here. It's just a lot easier for Sony to control what you buy. And it also means that they are more in control with game sales and everything else. So with all of those reasons, plus a bunch more I'm sure you can figure out in the comments, it would be something that I, if I were Sony, would want to push someone towards a digital edition. Personally, I prefer the Blu-ray versions of consoles, and I realise that that's not for everyone. You know, some people, physical media is dead and all of that, but personally, I am a fan of physical media still. I won't also mention the rest of the prices here, because, well, again, you can see them yourself, but a controller is about $60, with the charging station being $30. I honestly believe that that's about the right price for the controller. Again, it's about the limit that someone, I think, would tolerate to spend on a controller, and it's roughly in line with what Sony have charged in the past. And given all of the tech in the controller, we can certainly assume that it's not going to be like, $30 for a controller. So yeah, these prices I'm not confirming them because I am, once again, not privy to the final prices. And honestly, there is also a chance that the prices have not been set yet. There is a possibility that they could tweak the prices depending heavily on what Microsoft does. I still feel that Microsoft will undercut Sony. And yes, I do realise that creating the Xbox is not cheap. Like, that APU alone on that sucker is going to cost them quite a bit to manufacture. But then again, the PS5 is also not cheap, especially given the cooling solution and other components within it. So yeah, long story short, this makes sense to me. I believe that this is roughly in line with what I would expect Sony to charge, and it will be very interesting. Also, the other rumour is that the orders will be available on the 9th of September, which is the 25th anniversary of PlayStation. And can I also just pause it right there and say, how the hell is it already 25 years? But yeah. Also, while I'm on the subject of the PlayStation 5, I'd like to quickly tackle a really weird rumour that's floating around, and it concerns the space of the SSD. Now, you'd expect the fact that Sony, like 2 trillion times now, has said that it's 825 gigabytes, would kind of let you know that the space is 825 gigabytes, but there is a rumour floating around that it's actually 1 terabyte, but it's the OS reserve which is nuking the space. So essentially, the missing space is what's being taken up by the operating system, and this leaves games with 825 gigabytes, to be installed. And this is not the case. First of all, go to the Amazon store, look how Sony advertised the PS4 Pro or PS4, or Microsoft advertised the Xbox One or Xbox One X. It's not like the PS4 is being listed as 1.1 terabytes, right? And if you look at the amount of space that your disc has, it's certainly not 1 terabyte of space. Basically, they always advertise the maximum capacity of the drive, and whatever the OS takes, it takes. So if the OS takes 1 megabyte, then, well, there you go. If it takes 300 gigabytes, then you're going to be left with, that space. It's that simple. Secondly, just the way that the PS5 itself is put together with the SSD. I've covered this more extensively in another video, which was something like why the next generation consoles SSDs will change everything. Try to remember to link it in the video description. I've gone into this more exhaustively, but long story short, there are essentially 12 channels for the PS5 SSD. This is one of the reasons it's such a high-speed device. But there are basically 12 NAND chips, and if you add all of those together, it comes to the 825 gigabytes. Once again, I've gone into this much more extensively in the past, in a much more technical way, but I just wanted to throw that out there because, quite frankly, it's such a weird rumour. At least for people who watch my video, I wanted to try and just nip it in the bud. And next, this is a very interesting rumour that's floating around, and it comes to us via Reset Era. And this concerns Halo Infinite. And it's good or bad, depending on your perspective. The user by the name of Sponger, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, they are apparently mod verified, but as always, mod verification doesn't necessarily mean that the information is 100% accurate. We know about the Dusk Golem situation, not throwing the guy under the bus, I'm just simply saying that these things can be wrong, but according to their information, 343 are struggling to achieve a performance of over 900p on the Xbox One S. And they are now considering making the console not have a port of Halo Infinite, and for it to be next generation only. So it's not going to be a cross-generational release. Microsoft are yet to comment on this story, and Video Games Chronicle have actually reached out to them. But according to Sponger, the current version of Halo Infinite on the Xbox One S is nowhere near 1080p, even lower than 900p, and is having, quote, serious issues with asset loading, much worse than seen in the PC demo. The idea is to change at the engine level how assets load, make RT as default, improve / unlock some assets, improve geometry, post-processing, and add more CPU-bound interactivity. And furthermore, they've even said that Halo Infinite could be pushed beyond 2021. And it's been, quote, pretty messy up there with decisions, but they are convinced they need to make the best Halo game ever, end quote. I honestly, I think Halo Infinite looks like it has the makings to be a really cool game. Now, I know that's not popular of an opinion, but I'm going to stick with it. I did like what I saw in the trailer. It just looked like it wasn't ready. It looked like a really cool demo for a game that needs more time in development. So firstly, I want to applaud Microsoft for taking the time to make the game look better, to make the game more polished. Whenever a studio does this, it's not something that you should be critical of, it's something that you should applaud. With that said, and I want to stress that I can't verify this information, but I have been told it by a couple of people who have been pretty accurate in the past. I got told that the versions of Halo Infinite for both consoles are a little different from one another. It's not like it's basically the same code which is running on both consoles. Furthermore, someone else told me that the project has actually been, well, basically reset a couple of times. They didn't give me any real insight into what this meant, but long story short, they said that the game essentially was started over at least twice. This is what I was told, and I'm very certain of the person's credentials, but they were not willing to go further than that. So I don't know if this is before the game started with the Xbox Series X code, or this is after the Xbox Series X code, so I don't want to make any false claims. I'm being as honest as possible. I personally believe that the Xbox Series X, as well as the Xbox ecosystem, will have great games. It's just, at the moment, they're in this kind of rock and a hard place situation where a lot of the projects seem behind schedule. And I don't think that that's necessarily a death sentence to the console. I mean, the PlayStation 2, which is arguably about the most popular console ever, and I'm not referring in terms of sale numbers even, I just mean like how fondly the console's remembered. It didn't really have any killer games. Like, when I first bought a PlayStation 2, I had like Tekken, Tag, and I can't even remember the next game I bought. I'm pretty sure it was like Devil May Cry. No, I don't know. It may have been Devil May Cry. There was a game I did buy maybe before that, but I don't even remember what it was. I'm pretty damn sure that Tekken was like the only game that I played for months, which was fine because I was a huge Tekken fan at the time. And even Xbox 360, like when the Xbox 360 launched, I was playing Perfect Dark for like months online, admittedly. Now, I will confess that Perfect Dark was an exclusive to the 360, of course, but it wasn't the best, game. There were some other titles as well, which were pretty nice, like Cameo, for example. I thought that was actually quite underrated. But if you look at, say, Perfect Dark, it was pretty fun. The campaign was quite cool for co-op especially, but online was not particularly balanced, certainly with certain weapons like the what was that gun? S-Dragon, I think it was called. Someone correct me if I'm wrong there. I think it was called S-Dragon. But it wasn't particularly balanced and, had all of these issues, but it was also kind of unique because, there wasn't a whole ton of games at the time for the Xbox 360, especially ones that had, like, good co-op and online competition, so, people played it, but it wasn't like a killer app. It wasn't like, I don't know, Mario 64 or something like that, right? So, I'll be interested to see what the Xbox launches with. I'm going to be very interested to see how the next year shapes up for the Xbox. But with all of that said, thank you very much for watching the video. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.